Not all creatures lie beneath the bed, though. They refer to themselves as family, sit at the dinner table, and say grace before meals. You'll never hear a narrative as heavy as the one I'm telling you now. My name is Grace Harper, and I am currently 78 years old. I have been silent for more than 50 years. Family secrets are protected even more strictly than property lines in the little community where I was born and raised in rural Georgia, where the summer heat is oppressive. Many people in this area only know me as Nana Grace, the white-haired woman who consistently attends church at 6 o'clock and sells handmade pies at the Saturday farmers market. Few people can comprehend the burden I've carried since I was 10 years old. Since sharing this had a profound impact on me, I would greatly appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to the channel. Please let me know where you're seeing this video from in the comments section so I can connect with you there as well. I think it's time for me to share my tale. I've learned to bear this burden not for myself, but for all the kids who, like me, had their childhoods taken from them by people who ought to have looked out for them. After hearing my story, maybe someone will have the guts to take action before inaction turns into a prison sentence. My mother used to put pots of red geraniums on the small porch of the basic wooden house I grew up in, which was painted pale blue. Like other families in our community, we were a modest family. Samuel, my father, toiled diligently in the cotton fields, setting out before dawn and returning when the sky was already full of stars. In addition to taking care of the house and kids, my mother, Margaret, made pies and bread to sell to the neighbors. Out of my 3 siblings, I was the eldest. Little Lily, who had just turned 5, and Jacob, who was 2 years younger, followed after me. We led a humble life filled with modest joys and hard work. Swimming in the stream on sweltering summer days, the stories my mother told me before bed, and the scent of bread fresh from the afternoon oven. Before disaster struck, on that fateful May 12th, 1957, we were content in our own way despite being impoverished. The day started out overcast, with a little rain that didn't let up. The sound of my mother coughing came from the adjacent room, waking me up sooner than normal. This cough wasn't your typical one. It felt harsh and deep, like something was ripping through her. My mother was lying down as I walked into my parents' room, her face flushed from a fever, and her lips had a peculiar hue that I now know was cyanosis. "Mom, is everything all right?" Terrified to see her like that, I asked her. She made an effort to smile, but it seemed to cost her dearly. "My flower, it's just a nasty case of the flu. It will soon pass." However, it failed. Her condition rapidly deteriorated throughout the morning. The fever increased. The breathing grew harder. Because of the intense rain, my father, who usually spends that time in the fields, had not left the house. His face hardened with anxiety at her state. He mentioned the nearby town, Fairview, which was larger than ours and had a tiny hospital, and added, "I'm taking Margaret to the hospital in Fairview. Until I return, you'll be responsible for the little ones, Grace." Walter Harper, my paternal grandfather, was residing with us at the time. About 8 months prior, following the death of my grandma, he had visited our home. Even at 68, he was a big guy with broad shoulders and hands that were calloused from decades of working as a supervisor on local farms. His gray mustache was neatly maintained, and his eyes seemed to assess everything with a cold, calculating assessment. My grandfather put his hand on my father's shoulder and said, "I'll watch the little ones, Samuel. Don't worry about anything here and take Margaret." With gratitude, my father nodded. He brought my mother to the town after wrapping her in blankets. My final memory of her is of her eyes meeting mine one final time as her father led her outside in the pouring rain, her pale face standing out against the dark coverings. "Grace, look after your siblings." She said the nearly inaudible words, "I'll be back soon," which would turn into an impossible promise to fulfill. The day slowly went by. I made a basic meal the way my mother had taught me and made up activities to divert my siblings' attention in an effort to keep things normal for them. My grandfather spent most of his time sitting on the porch, smoking his pipe and observing the rain, which didn't seem to be stopping. He would occasionally enter to see how we were doing, but he quickly went back to his silent watch. My worries increased as the day grew darker. Dad, where were you? Why were they not returning? Had the roads deteriorated due to the rain, slowing down the trip? I put my siblings to bed at around 7 o'clock. Jacob took a hard time to fall asleep, realizing that something important was happening. I told Lily one of the stories Mom used to tell, and she fell asleep right away since she was too little to comprehend. The sound of wheels in our yards muck reached me at around 9 o'clock. With my pulse pounding, I rushed to the window in the hopes of seeing my mother coming home. However, my father was by himself, drenched from the rain, which was now falling heavily. I knew right away that something horrible had happened as he entered. His normally straight figure was now hunched like a much older man, and his eyes were red and puffy. As though he were in front of a coffin, he removed his damp hat and pressed it to his chest. "Mom, where are you?" I questioned, but his distraught expression told me the answer already. "Your mommy," he said. His voice, however, faltered. He took a deep breath and went on. "Daughter, Margaret didn't make it. It was highly advanced pneumonia. There was nothing further they could do," the doctor explained. Everything around me appeared to fall apart. How is that possible? Even though she had a fever, Mom was there that morning, trying to smile. How might one day take her away forever? I barely noticed my father's wet garments soaking my dress as he gave me a tight hug. For a long period, we remained that way, experiencing an indescribable anguish. From the kitchen door, my grandfather stared, his expression as blank as ever. With a slight retreat, my father eventually said, "The wake arrangements are already being made. I am going to bring her home tomorrow morning. Grace, I'll need you to be strong for the kids." I swallowed the tears and nodded. I was the one who helped Mom with everything and had always been the responsible daughter. I had to be much more so now. My grandfather told my father, "Go rest, son. It was a long travel, and tomorrow will be a challenging day. With Grace, I'll watch the little ones." My father gave me a hesitant look, although his face was filled with signs of exhaustion. "Daughter, try to get some rest. You'll need strength, although I know it's difficult." Even though I knew I wouldn't be able to sleep that night, I consented once more. Dad entered the bedroom that he and Mom had shared until a few hours prior. For hours, the muted sound of his sobs reverberated through our house's thin walls. I sat at the table in the living room and looked at nothing. Outside, the rain persisted as though the sky itself were pleading for my mother. On the opposite side of the table, my grandfather was pouring himself a shot of whiskey that we reserved for guests. He held out the glass to me and said, "Take a sip. It lessens the discomfort." I paused. I knew my mother wouldn't approve, and I had never consumed alcohol in my life. However, Mom was no longer there, and I felt as though I would be swallowed whole by the ache in my chest. I took a tiny taste of the glass after accepting it. My eyes began to well up with tears as the alcohol scorched my throat. I took a larger drink this time. When I was done, my grandfather refilled the glass and whispered, "That's right, Grace, life is difficult. It's better to find out that early." How many cocktails I consumed that evening is a mystery to me. All I know is that my thoughts became muddled and the environment became hazy. My grandfather eventually rose from his seat and joined me. As he assisted me up, he added in an oddly quiet voice, "Come, I'll help you lie down." He did not, however, show me the room that Lily and I shared. Rather, he showed me to the back of the house, to his own room. I didn't question it since I was so confused and heartbroken. Perhaps I reasoned that it would be best to avoid upsetting my younger sister by crying. For years, the details of what transpired next were buried in the deepest recesses of my memory. The smell of whiskey and pipe tobacco mingled with hot breath on my face, the weight of a massive body on mine that is too little to fight, pointed pain, disregarded pleadings, rough hands where they shouldn't be, muttered things that still give me nightmares. "And now you're the head of the household." My next distinct memory is of daybreak, so I must have passed out at some time. I was back in my own room, resting next Lily, who was sleeping soundly and oblivious to the strange world around us. I briefly believed that everything, my mother's illness, her passing, and the events that followed, had been a vicious nightmare. Then I noticed the bloodstain on the sheet, the marks on my arms, and the physical discomfort. It had not been a bad dream. It was authentic. It was all real. In addition, my mom was actually dead. I also lost my innocence, my childhood, and my faith in the world on the same day that I lost her. Something shut off inside of me at that very instant. Over my feelings, an iron barrier lowered itself, sealing everything within. In order to avoid waking Lily, I got up slowly, changed, and cleaned my face in the room's water basin. I saw a different person when I glanced at myself in the little mirror on the wall. Her eyes had aged decades in a single night, but her face was still that of a 10-year-old girl. Like my mother used to do, I went to the kitchen to make breakfast. I was aware that the house will soon be crowded with family members and neighbors on the day of her wake. My sole safety net, the one thing preventing me from utterly wrecking myself, was normalcy. My father had already woken up, his face scarred by the night's sobs, his eyes puffy. He gave me another hug, and I had to use all of my newly found resolve to keep from crying in his arms and screaming the truth about what had transpired. His voice was gruff as he said, "I'm going to get your mother now." I gave a robotic nod. Take care of the little ones when they wake up. I was going to take care of the little ones from that day on. Keep quiet and tend to the young ones. I mean, who would trust me? Who would disagree with a well-respected individual like my grandfather? And how could I cause my father, who had recently lost the love of his life, any more suffering? The day I lost my mother and many other things, the day I discovered that the world is not safe, especially for girls, and the day I discovered that monsters can sometimes be our own blood, marked the beginning of my long winter of solitude. And until something happened that altered everything, I remained silent for so long that I nearly forgot what it was like to have a voice. The days that followed my mother's funeral went by like a thick fog over the fields in a Georgia winter, but that's a tale for our next gathering. The wake was a haze of well-known faces, consoling words that fell on my ears, and hugs that failed to warm me. All I can recall is the plain light wood coffin, my mother's face, too calm, like a wax figure, rather than the lively woman who sung as she kneaded bread, and how I gripped my brother's hands tightly the entire time. Jacob understood enough to cry uncontrollably at the age of 8. Too young to comprehend the finality, Lily kept asking when her mother would wake up. Every question made my chest twist like a dagger. We had rituals for grieving in our small society. Our pantry was stocked with food that would last for weeks, including baked breads, pies, preserves, sausages, and cheeses, thanks to the women who took over the kitchen. Knowing that my father wouldn't be able to do everything by himself for the first several weeks, the men took turns assisting him with the field labor. The only real solace in those days was solidarity. However, life has its own urgency, so the visits eventually dwindled and people went back to their regular schedules. A week following the funeral, we were once more just the three of us, a grandfather whose eyes now stalked me around the home like a predator, a father who was crushed by the loss, and 3 children who had no mother. My father was so preoccupied with his own sorrow that he hardly paid attention to anything going on around him. He went out before sunrise and came back at sunset, weary and unable to do anything else but lie in bed. I believe that the only way he was able to cope with my mother's absence was through his work. Maybe he thought he wouldn't dream of her at night if he worked himself to exhaustion. Sometimes Dad would run his hand over my hair and remark, "You're being a good girl, Grace." Your mom would be pleased. Those remarks hurt me deeply, even though they should have given me solace. Would he still have that pride in his eyes when he looked at me if he knew what had transpired while he was away? I took on as many of the household duties as I could. I got up early to cook what I had learned from my mother, wash clothes in the stone tank, and assist my siblings in getting ready for the 2-mile drive to the remote school. My tiny hands attempted to mimic her movements, but the results were inconsistent. The bread didn't rise as well, the clothes weren't as white, and the beans never tasted the same. Every setback served as an agonizing reminder of her absence. In order to avoid waking Lily, who slept next to me, I sobbed quietly into my pillow at night when everyone else was asleep. I wept for my mother, for myself, and for the burden of obligations too great for such frail shoulders. The main reason I cried was the fear that filled my chest whenever I was by myself with my grandfather. He became more cautious and methodical after that first night. He waited for my siblings to be at school or playing with the neighbors, or for my father to go out and settle some dispute in town. Calls to his room, the tool shed, or even the bank of the stream that ran across our property were always made with an excuse. He would urge, "Come help me here, Grace," in a harsh voice that made it impossible to refuse. And I would go, my body shaking, unable to flee but aware of what lay ahead. In an era when children had no voice and the word of an adult, especially a well-respected male in the community, was unquestionably law, what option did a 10-year-old girl have? The words he used thereafter were always the same. "This remains private between us. Your dad has enough issues already. You do not wish to add to his misery, do you?" Using my affection for my father as a weapon, he silenced me. In my innocence, I was powerless to stop this vicious game of deception. I genuinely thought that my father would die of grief if I told the truth. That if our family, which was already shaky due to Mom's passing, fell apart entirely, it would be my fault. The months passed slowly in this never-ending nightmare. Winter arrived in full force in the south, bringing with it nights so cold we could see our breath inside the house, and morning frosts that turned the fields white. I nearly enjoyed the cold that allowed me to wear multiple layers of clothing, putting another barrier between me and the hands that raped me on the days when the wind was the strongest and could cut right through to the bone. I eventually had the ability to mentally remove myself from those situations. My mind fled far away, but my body remained imprisoned there. To the tales my mother used to share. In spring, we used to pluck flowers in the verdant fields. To some far-off time when I'll be old enough to flee there with my siblings. It was a kind of dissociation that helped me survive the intolerable. When I turned 11 in August of that year, I became horrified to see how my body was starting to change. My predicament was exacerbated by the appearance of tiny, uncomfortable buds on my chest, which signaled an early puberty. I felt sick to my stomach when my grandfather took notice of these developments. Becoming a young woman, eh? One day he made a remark. I felt like I wanted to vanish as his gaze moved over my body. "Your mother also developed early." I did my best to conceal the modifications. I had tight bands beneath my shirts, hunched my shoulders, and wore loose clothing. Anything that would make him appear smaller, less noticeable, and less appealing. However, it was pointless. That summer, Aunt May, a widow in her 40s who lived in town, started to visit us often. She was a distant cousin of my father. On Sundays, she visited, brought us cakes and sweets, and watched our predicament with keen eyes that seemed to see more than others. She once told my father, "This girl is too thin." Those eyes, too? They appear to have belonged to a considerably older person. For the first time, someone had taken notice. I had a mixture of panic and hope. A part of me wanted her to find out, to remove that burdensome secret from me. Another portion shuddered in fear of the repercussions of not being believed, of creating a commotion inside the family. It was Aunt May whom my grandfather saw as a threat. When she was there, he grew more wary and treated me with a measured distance that could be mistaken for respect. But there were clear signs in his eyes. I had to keep quiet because no one would believe me. I started to reject in little ways over time. Little uprisings that most likely went unreported by others, but that, to me, were crucial engagements in the war I was fighting in silence. I put scissors under my pillow and went to sleep. In order to lock the doors to the room I shared with Lily, I started waking up earlier than everyone else. When I was by myself with him, I made up diseases, but silence was my best weapon. It was the observer's quiet, not the victim's. I became able to interpret his signs, anticipate his moods, and predict his moves. I was aware of when it would be safer to be among other people, when it would be safer to hide in the barns.